Welcome to Silicon Valley Asian Business Talk.
My name is Melvin, and I run a startup that focuses on helping founders to operate their companies. So essentially, we serve as an operations manager to take care of all the compliance, their financial operations like accounting and bookkeeping, as well as the people operations like payroll, recruiting. The goal is to essentially simplify the process of running a company for the founder so that they can save time, keep their focus on the really strategic aspect, and leave all the operational work to our platform. So we built a business in Singapore, and we're now in the US. So the company in Singapore is called Starboard, but the product we're going to launch in the US, or we're in the process of launching with some early customers already, is called Stellar.
Discussion topic: My startup journey.
You are a very experienced entrepreneur. You had successful startup company or new ventures in the past, and also you're running your new company right now. So the first question relates to so-called searching for the right first product and also the first target customer segment, and we call them product market fit. Mm-hmm. Would you please share your reflections or lessons on searching for such product market fit? What are the lessons and mistakes you made? Things like that.
Yeah. Well, this question alone could take up, a whole hour, right? There's so many lessons I learned, and definitely so many mistakes as well. So I don't know. I'm not sure if there's a logical flow for answering this, but I would say, to some extent, you don't really find product market fit in a sense. It's hard to. I found it hard to predict a path to finding product market fit. It was more like, let's try a whole bunch of different things, experiment on a whole bunch of things, talk to a lot of people, and find out what's the most painful thing. The most painful thing that not everybody else is already trying to solve, right? The one thing's clear is that today it's getting easier and easier to start a business, right? Companies like myself, for example, I'm building a platform to help other founders start their business and run it easily. And because it's easier and cheaper to start a company today, every time you think that you found a problem that no one's solving, you'll soon realize that everybody's solving the same problem, right? So I think if you take a very logical, methodical approach to finding product market fit, you start with the problem. You start with the pain. What's causing somebody pain? And are there enough people experiencing this pain for you to do something about it? And what's the most logical way to do something about it in a way that when somebody uses your solution, it feels refreshingly new and it actually solves the problem, right?
Discussion topic: Why product market fit should consider founder fit.
I've come to realize that finding product market fit is just one dimension. There is this notion of product market founder fit. Sometimes it's a very clear problem and a very big market, but if the founder isn't quite aligned with, if it's not in the founder's DNA, it's not something that the founder is really passionate about, right? Or maybe excited about at the start, but not passionate about to solve in the long term, then it's very easy to just fizzle out, right? So I think that product market fit is important, but equally important is product market founder fit, right? And that means that something that is aligned with your personality, your values, your long-term, aspiration. And in terms of how, there are tons of different ways. I think the key thing is, well, first of all, talk to a lot of customers. That's one way. But there's also another famously, I think Steve Jobs or some other founders are known to not start with the customers. They start with solving the problem that they themselves face, right? On the notion that, well, customers may not know that they have a problem, or customers may not know there's a better way of doing things until somebody showed them the way to do it. Just as how, when Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone, we were like, oh, that's a better way to design a phone, right? So I think the key is just try everything really fast. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, I will let you know your product market founder fit is a great point and makes a lot of sense. And so, actually, it does not have to be very logical. All you say makes sense. Whatever you think is true, just share with our audience. I think it adds great value.
Discussion topic: building startup. What kind of people to hire and when?
I think you started out the question by asking how do you scale, and tons of just go online, Google, ask ChatGPT, and you have countless ideas and tips on how to scale. I guess for me, the key focus is on people, right? If you build a great team, if you bring on the right people on board to work alongside you, I think that's the first step. Build a great team, bring on the right people, and the people will build the business. So my focus, my priority is always on just having a great team. Makes it a lot enjoyable as well. Building a business from scratch, especially in an industry that I had like zero experience in previously. It's challenging. It takes time. It's hard work, and lots of learnings. And it's only fun when you enjoy working with the people around you. And so for me, I'm really thankful. All the members of my leadership team are just amazing people. I enjoy working with them. So no matter how hard things are or how challenging things are, I'm having fun every day, almost every day.
Yeah, thank you, Melvin. That's a very good point. You talk about it's all about people, scaling people. Have you, had this kind of a experience or challenges of deciding when to scale up people, when to invest people, whether it's ready or not ready, and what's the reason? If you do face some kind of a struggles, on those issues, why? And also, how do you address those kind of issues? It's almost like a left foot, right foot. Left foot is the demand from the business. The right foot is the people to manage the business. How do you balance these two foot?
Yeah. Well, it's a real balancing act. I don't think there's a real playbook, right? Everyone's journey is going to be so different because we're talking about people, right? Sometimes you bring on the right person, even before you really need that person, or before you can even actually afford to bring on that person. But because it's the right person, the chemistry is right, the fit is right, the business just, 3x or 5x or 10x, and later on it pays for it, right? And sometimes you really need that person. You need somebody to fill that role. You have the money to hire the person to fill that role, but if it's the wrong person, it's going to cause complications down the road as well. So it's a very tricky, it's a real balancing act. And I think I would say that the best advice I can give to a founder is do two things, right? One is be as logical as possible, plan ahead, and write down what you need somebody to do. You can only scale when you scale yourself, right? So write down what help you need. What's your ideal profile for the next person to join the team? What problems does a person need to solve? I think that's the most logical and the easiest thing to think about. But I would say go a bit deeper in thinking about what kind of values you want a person to bring to the team. Think about your own values, because you can bring the person the right skill set. But the person comes in with values that are very contrary to yours. They move at a different pace. They have different expectations or different, bars for transparency and authenticity. Then it would cause conflict. Either it will cause conflict between the way you're working, or it would, it would cause the company to just go in a very different direction and or evolve a different culture that at the end of the day you may not even enjoy, right? So to give you a very practical example, if you, I think of myself as, or rather, what I value a lot is authenticity and honesty, right? People ask me something, I'll just give them, the most straight up answer, right? I don't think there's nothing to hide. I speak my mind freely, right? Because I think it's important for people to know exactly how I think, how I work. And, when there's some people I brought on board who don't share that value, and after a while it became a little hard, affected the culture, and, and it was just painful, right? So I would say, there's a logical aspect of bringing on people on board, and that is, what you need them to do, what kind of roles. Also, logically, you want to figure out what kind of values you have, and what kind of values you hope that they bring into the organization. That's one. But then there's the other dimension. The other dimension, is kind of rely on your gut. Sometimes you meet, you meet a really great potential partner, potential coworker, and you can't really afford the person, or you don't really know what the person can come in and do, but you just know this person's a great person. The moment they come on board, they would just make magic happen, right? In those moments, even if the logical side of things don't seem to make sense, you can take the risk, bring that person on board, and see what happens, right? And I don't know, that's like, everyone's going to have their own principles and rules for running a business. Some people take a very methodical approach. I try to rely on both. But I found personally, for me in this particular venture, I think every member of my current leadership team has been brought on like that.
When you say brought on like that, is like based upon your personal gut feelings and rather than very rational, logical analysis. Is that what you mean?
I'd say it's both, right? Both. I don't. So, well, right now I'm thinking of 7 different roles, and so it's hard for me. It's like maybe I should think of one, right? But there's a pattern. Typically, I think, okay, I need help in this area, right? I've started a bit of product design, for example, and then I realized, okay, I'm not going to do product design in the long term. I need to do other things, and so I need to bring somebody on board to do product design. But if I don't find the right person, then I just keep doing what I need to do as long as possible, rather than settle for somebody who may not be the right fit.
Okay.
And then when you find the right person, sometimes I find the right person, I'm like, okay, I don't think we really need this person to come in and play this particular role right now. It's a great person. I'd rather have the person on the team and figure out, what he or she can do for the company with me in the long term. And, when we bring the person on board, we soon figure out, oh, this is where the person is adding value.
Discussion topic: value of hiring people who don't fit specific roles.
Just give you 2 very specific examples. There were 2 individuals that, I wasn't sure I needed them to play the specific role that they played in their previous organizations. But, one was a longtime friend, and one was a person I was introduced to by my VC, and both were great people. And they came on board, with very generic titles. One of them was chief of staff, and the other one was a chief commercial officer. And that was mainly because I just, didn't know what else to do, right? Didn't know what specific role they could play. But the moment they came on board, they just did whatever it took for the company, for the team to be successful. And then gradually, we've evolved, they would just start jumping into different areas and solving problems, and we continually evolve the role that they play, just as how I evolve my role as well. So the one thing I want to point out is I think it's especially useful, especially for young founding teams, is to find people who are generalists, but with that specialization, right? I think I haven't read too deeply about it, but I hear people talk about this T-shaped, team member or founder, right? Where somebody has, it's enough of a generalist to help to really contribute to a company at a very early stage, and at the same time has a specialized set of skills and experience and capabilities that they can jump into in the long term. I found that especially useful, right? Of course, I had members of the team who, were specialists when they came on board, and they just jumped in and they focused on engineering or design. But at the same time, they had this breadth of experience and this, they were team players, and they were willing to just roll up their sleeves and do a little bit of whatever wasn't in their core job scope. Maybe merging this with the earlier point, I think the key thing is as I built the company, I found it really useful to have a very clear definition of the next person that I need on my team. And at the same time, be on the lookout for people who may not fit the exact description and still bring that person on board anyway. And when you find somebody who's able to do this specific thing, and is also willing to roll up the sleeves and do a bunch of other things and play a generalist role in the company, it's worth considering.
Okay, that's very good, very good. I just want a specific point because I want to go a little bit deeper. Could you tell us the value of bringing people you don't need, but you think you will need later?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? If you don't need it, why do you want to bring these people in now?
Yeah. So it's not so much that there's not much value in bringing somebody in that we don't need, right? But I would say that, for founders who are running a company, most of the time you don't really know what's going to come up next.
Yeah.
You think you've got a roadmap, you think you've got a plan, but as we all know, nothing ever rarely, or not never, but things rarely go according to plan, right? And so it's more important to, I guess, have a team that can support you in navigating the chaos than to have a specialist to come in and solve one problem, right? At the early stage of a company. Later on, when the company grows bigger, you need to hire more specialists. But I think the most value is created when you find just great teammates who can come in and help you to navigate chaos. And I've personally found that the people who came in this way weren't found when I was looking for a specific role or somebody to solve a specific problem.
Discussion topic: how do I manage pivots in my 3 ventures?
Searching for the right product, right direction, called a pivot, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any kind of advice or wisdom or examples of managing these kind of pivot, which is it's an extremely important, frustrating, but necessary component.
This is my 3rd technology startup. It's my 4th business. And I focus this time around very much on solving a real problem. My first few companies, we focus on building something for the future, right? My first company was an indoor positioning company. We use Wi-Fi signals to locate people indoors. No, not people, mobile phones. And we enabled building owners to figure out, to understand how people were behaving in their shopping malls, in their hotels, in the hospitals, right? So this was built in 2010, very early on. And we were essentially, at that point in time, building something for the future, because at that point in time, people just didn't really know, didn't really know how useful all that location data could be for their operations and for their marketing and every aspect of the business. This time around, we're choosing to build something today. Founders need help with operating the company, right? And there are existing solutions out there, but I find that many of the existing solutions have gaps in terms of efficiencies, effectiveness, and overall, user experience or customer experience. So that's how we got started. And because it was a real problem that we were solving, there was an existing market, it's easier to build a business because people are already paying for that solution. So we just focus 100% on making sure that we innovate and build something on top of the existing solutions that are out there to create a different experience for customers. So I've run 3 startups so far, right? So the first one, we made slight adjustments to how we position ourselves. It was an indoor positioning company. We started off by saying that we're going to help building owners, reach out to or send very targeted messages to people who are in the buildings, right? Later on, we realized that the most valuable proposition we could create was analytics. Not so much the ability to reach out, but more the ability to understand. So it wasn't much of a pivot. We started very clearly focused on indoor positioning technology and indoor positioning solutions or indoor analytics. We stuck with it all the way until we were acquired. For my second company, I started a business that's focused on commissioned art. And it was, I joined an accelerator program here in the Valley, here in the Bay Area. And we were pivoting from day 2 because the the founders of the accelerator program very wisely said that it's not a large enough market, to be really exciting. And so we're pivoting on day 2 and we tried different businesses. So I handled that. We had a great team. The reason why we wanted to pivot was because I had a really great team and we just wanted to find a business that we were excited about. Right? That didn't go anywhere because we ended up in a joint venture that, that kind of failed. Actually, no, it did fail. Right? It failed because our joint venture partner essentially, did not follow through on forming the joint venture. So that's a separate story altogether. So I've experienced pivoting from one market to another. And in this current business, we started off building an operating system for founders. And as we started discovering more and more, and as we started validating our theses on what customers really want, we are changing our perspective, right? And so that's why even for the US, we have a new product, a new brand. And I shared this analogy with my team recently, and I say that building a business is like going up an elevator, right? You start off by seeing the world at this level. And if you're experimenting fast enough, you're doing the right things, you're talking to the right people, your experience should be, that of going up an elevator. The higher you go, your perspective changes. And when your perspective changes, the old ways of doing things has to change. And so we can't get sentimental about, what we were building when we were at this level, right? At this level, our worldview changes. So I think the most important thing is perspective. How we see the world, very profoundly affects every single thing that we do. How we talk to a customer, the very customers that we're choosing, what kind of features we build, and maybe more importantly, how we think about the features that we're building, right? So we could generalize it, or we could consider our lives, our journey in building companies or products. We could view it as going up an elevator, whether as an individual or as a team. Right? And the way I like to think about it is, as an individual and as a team, we're all going up this elevator and we're constantly refining our perspective. And what's important for us is to be aware of our worldview, our perspective of things, and, alter our tactics accordingly.
Discussion topic: should startups pursue disruptive innovation or not?
What's your philosophy? What's your practice based upon your current and past new ventures in dealing with what we call the radical change of your products, features, versus incrementally improving or adjusting your product directions? Because, some radical changes, or we call it radical innovation of your products, your features. The reason it's radical because it may potentially bring in good benefit, but it's risky. Versus very conservative approach, only very small incremental changes after you found your product market fit. In other words, you already have a basic base.
Yeah.
Then how do you deal with these two different type of changes? The radical, potentially high return but high risk, versus very conservative, small incremental after the product market fit.
Yeah. So I believe you're referring to the notion of sustaining innovation versus disruptive innovation. Right?
Yeah, you can
kind of
view it that way, right? Because the company to change, to grow and develop, right?
What's my philosophy? Well, again, just as how there is a product market founder fit, I think that it's also important for individuals to consider whether they are, they are gifted or they are, designed for not just the individual, but also the founding team or the whole company. Are they a company that, is better at sustaining innovation or disruptive innovation, right? And what are they interested in? Sometimes in my conversations with other founders as well, especially founders who are starting companies for the first time, it's very easy to get caught up with the whole fantasy, the whole romance of building a disruptive business. And sometimes founders are actually not built for that. There are some founders who maybe don't have the vision for building disruptive technology or a disruptive business, but they're really great at, sustaining innovation, right? And if they apply themselves to try to build something disruptive, but they're not really built for that, not really gifted for that, then it's just kind of going against the grain. It can be a very painful process without a good outcome. Similarly, if a founder is really built for, disruptive businesses, but they put themselves in an environment where, either they tell themselves or the shareholders tell the founder, we just don't aim for the moon, don't do anything too disruptive, just keep improving the business sustainably and make sure that, you focus on the sustaining innovation, then they're going to struggle as well. So I think the first philosophy or the first way to think about it is just asking, I think the founder or the founding team have to ask themselves, like, what are we built for? What excites us? What are we really good at? Just think of it in concentric circles, right? Maybe think of it this way, like the founder or the founding team, are they more a disruptive type of team, or are they more a sustaining innovation kind of team? Are they more, are they more excited by, are they more gifted for, or built for sustaining or disruptive innovation? I think that's one circle. And then the other circle is, are they excited about that? And, practical reasons as well. Who are the other shareholders, right? Because a founder may be excited about building something completely disruptive and investing a lot of money in aiming for that outcome, but shareholders and other members of the team may not have that risk appetite. They might just want to build something stable, something that's, sustaining, focus on sustaining innovation to get the business, to build stronger foundations for the core revenue generation portion of the business, right? And then the third is the market. Is there truly something disruptive that can take place in that market? So maybe that's one way to think about it.
That's great. So you kind of say the real answer is really depends upon several factors, as you mentioned. First factor probably is the personality of the founder or the funding team, the skill set, the aspiration, and also the stakeholders, as well as opportunity space, which is the market.
Yeah, that's right.
Discussion topic: how should young startups deal with competition?
Based upon your experience, how did you deal with, again, talking about after you found the base, the product market fit, we're talking about further grow, further scale up. How do you deal with, the adjusting your product direction or based upon the customer needs or understanding or even anticipating needs? Let me call that following customer versus responding to competitors' threats.
Yeah.
In your real practice, what's your wisdom on this kind of issue, these two drivers, or you pay more attention to customers, less attention to competitors, or pay attention to competitors under these situations? Can you share some of your practice or wisdom on that?
The question is, whether do I focus on what the competitors are doing, or
yes, that's true. Following customer versus responding to competitors' threats or moves.
Yeah.
To influence your new product decision, innovation direction, things like that.
Yeah. Well, if I had to answer the question a bit more generally, I would say, as we talked about, it's all context. It depends on what stage of the business you're at, right? We're at I would say we're
elaborate. Would you say depend upon the stage?
Yeah.
What do you mean stage? Which stage will tend to?
Well,
elaborate on that point.
Sure. So, for a very young company, it's most likely that most of your bigger competitors, because if you're a young company, you don't really want to consider other companies at an early stage really a competitor, right? You want to compete against those who've been in this for a longer time and much bigger. And bigger companies, by very definition, they're bigger, they've got more resources, they've got more capital, they've got more of everything, more of learnings and everything. So ultimately, I would say that the biggest advantage that a younger company would have is speed, because a younger company is less bogged down by, the more complex decision-making process that other companies would have. And the willingness to address something, a customer pain that the bigger companies are not willing to address. So I would say there are some things that it's worth paying attention to. You want to pay attention to what has worked for competitors. You don't want to pay too much attention because sometimes it can be really scary when you pay very close attention to how much money they've raised, like hundreds of millions of dollars. If you just pay attention to what they've done on the surface, it can be very intimidating. And it's not good for founder psychology to just pay too much attention to that. What's really important is for a founder to manage his or her own personal psychology, right? So not getting caught up with all the FOMO, not getting caught up with everything that the competitor is doing is important. At the same time, very astutely just looking out at what competitors are doing and just learning from the mistakes or learning from the best practices and applying it as quickly and sufficiently as possible. And so I'd say it's a combination of both, right? And then sticking to your gut and saying that, if there's something I'm committed to building, even if competitors don't build it, I'm going to do it anyway, right? So a lot of it has to depend on your personal conviction.
Okay, that's great, because earlier I think you mentioned another very interesting point. I don't know whether there's any kind of nuance that you can share. Let's say if you enter a market space, you have two types of competitors. One is the incumbents, the large companies.
Yeah.
The other one is the younger startups like you. Do you recommend or suggest as entrepreneurs or startup company founding teams to pay different type of attention, or there's any kind of difference when you deal with these two types of competitors?
I would say that at an early stage, I'd say, do a lot of research at the start, like learn as much as start. And especially for founders who just love to jump in and do things, right? I think I identify with that type of founders. I learn by doing. And so I have a preference to just jump in and build while learning about things. And I found that sometimes I wish I had done a bit more reading. I wish I had done a bit more research before I actually jump in, right? Or at least have some member on the team who has really done it, right? But there's no perfect scenario. What I was getting at is, do as much as you can, do as much as you have patience for at the start before jumping in. But the moment you jump in, I would say, just go, stop worrying about every single move that the competitor is doing. Just do what you want to do as fast as possible. And as we talked about at the very, very start, like the tons of competitors, right? You can start off thinking, I know exactly what my 5 competitors are doing. And then after a while, you realize, wait a moment, there are 50 competitors in the market actually, and 3 more are being built at that very moment.
Discussion topic: how experiences changed my approaches to new ventures.
Because you are a very experienced entrepreneur, had multiple ventures. So maybe this is a very, very good opportunity for young entrepreneur to learn from experienced people like you by telling them, if you compare young Melvin versus experienced Melvin, what's the difference in growing the new venture business? Could you kind of elaborate on that, like your journey? Think about the early days of young Melvin as entrepreneur versus today. How have you changed when you approach the same new venture, growing business?
Wow. Again, this is one of those questions where there are probably like 1,000 answers, 1,000 points to the answer.
Yeah,
give us so many things.
Give us some example you can think of.
So many things. Some examples. Today, I stopped settling, right? When I started my first, venture, first business, I just, I was focused on every opportunity. And I was just focused on solving problems. If I need if I need to hire somebody to do something, right? If I need to hire somebody to do marketing, for example, and the need became more and more apparent, sometimes even before finding the right person, I would just settle and find, and hire somebody whom I think, may not be the right person.
Okay. Oh, that's what you mean settling. Means you try to fix the problem in the very, kind of you don't have a lot of patience. Wait. Just try to solve the problem as soon as possible.
More of, if I need somebody to do X, right, and I interview a bunch of people and I still can't find the person who's the right fit, right? In the past, I would just pick the best, pick the next best person and just bring the person on board. In my experience, most of the time, it didn't really work out in the long term, right? Like I said, maybe the person has the right skills, but just poor ethics or just cultural, different values and different just wrong cultural fit, right? And so I would say don't settle on people. Like, be very clear I'm very clear what kind of values matter to me. I'm very clear what kind of values matter to me and what kind of person. And I don't settle, as I would say, maybe not perfectly, but I won't settle as much today as I did in the past. In fact, I try, my main focus is just don't settle, right? Just make sure that when I have somebody come on board the team, I'm not settling. That's the difference. In the past, I'll be like, okay, I need somebody to do this. I need a co-founder. I would just settle for whatever, right? Maybe not so much the co-founder. I've had really great co-founders so far, so pretty lucky there. But I think that one thing is not to settle. The other thing is to focus on, I'd say, to focus on building the business for myself. And I know that specific sentence can be misconstrued, right? I don't mean to build it for myself, but what I mean is, in the entire journey, it's all about my journey is all about growth. It's all about personal growth, right? Whatever happens to the business, any success or failure in the course of running the business, I think it's an opportunity to grow. I would say in my earlier ventures, it's all about the business. I live and die by the business. And if it was successful, I took it very personally. If something failed, I took it very personally as well. And today I don't. Today I just see the business, the venture as much as I care a lot about it, a lot. But at the same time, I see it as, it's not me, right? And whatever happens in the business, what's more important for me is that I handle my own personal psychology well. I focus on my growth. I focus on what I learn. I focus on what I can do differently for the business the next time. What else? I think something along the lines of disruptive, what we're talking about earlier, and that is some of my earlier businesses, I just focused on what the vision could be, what the ultimate disruption could be, and I didn't pay attention to the sustaining innovation that was required to build the team, to attract additional investment to go build that disruption. So my current business has a disruptive nature to it. It's something that we don't share publicly, but my team and I were excited about what that disruptive vision could be. But at the same time, the business model that we've chosen lends itself to sustaining innovation, the stuff that we can do day to day, right? We're investing for the future. We're making a lot of investments in building something that's truly disruptive. But on the day-to-day, we're also investing in making sustaining innovation so that our, the unit economics of our business continually improve.
That's very good. Seems to me the overall theme based upon your comment is, as you become more experienced, you become more patient. That goes back to your not settling. But make sure you do find the people who will not create a long-term problem by settling right now.
Yeah.
And the second point, I think it's very good one is you tend to be, as you become, more experienced, emphasize on the personal growth, less on the business success or failure? Is that what you, the second point you say, focus on personal growth?
I'd say focus on, well, not so much, focus on personal growth more than the business. It's more of just a different way I would view success and failure. Yeah. I would say at a very early stage, it was very easy for my whole identity to be caught up with the success or the failure of the company. But at a later stage, right now, it's just a lot easier to see it as being two separate things. And I would say it's not about being more patient. I'd say at this stage, I'm actually even more impatient about certain things. I am more tolerant about some things, and I am very much less tolerant about some things. So again, back to values, right? So I'm very, very much less tolerant about certain about values. So for instance, in our team, one of the key things that I've always believed in is that we should not have gossip in the company. Right? And since my last corporate job, my team members would know that I would not tolerate that, right? If I would not tolerate having one team member talk behind the back of another team member in a way that's unkind or that's unfair, right? I've always believed that if I want to say something about somebody, that one thing I want to say, I should be prepared to say it in front of that somebody. Right? And I think that gossip or this kind of back channeling, the harmful form of back channeling, is disruptive for a team. And because only people build companies, if we don't build a really great team culture, then it affects the outcome of the company. And the difference is, in the past, very much early on in my career, I could tolerate some of that. Today, I have zero tolerance for that. Right?
Yeah.
So
actually, go ahead.
So I'd say it's not so. I think that the difference is just I'm a lot clearer about what I tolerate and what I don't tolerate. And at the same time, I'm also a lot more tolerant about certain things, right? So maybe it's more of knowing what battles to pick and what battles not to pick.
Okay, that's good point.
Yeah. So if I can give and that's a way to shortcut this, right? So I've grown and I've learned all this about myself, and I've defined a way of working for myself through the years. But I would say for somebody starting out, they have the advantage of, doing that really quickly and at the start. So they're shortcuts. And I'd say it's just being a lot more reflective. I think the other word that comes to mind is flow as well. Early on in my career, early on in starting the business, I was told that you just have to bulldoze your way through, right? Like the hallmarks of a good entrepreneur or a good founder is that they get the impossible done. And that's true, right? There's one way to look at it. And yes, you definitely want the persistence and the aggressiveness to be able to get the impossible things done. But I think there's also a wisdom in the flip side. And sometimes if certain things, you just don't experience flow in the certain things, maybe it's not meant to be. And if you just tune into your intuition, as I do a bit more these days, I find that just going with the flow, not being distracted by stuff, but just observing what gives your team members and yourself most energy, and what energizes your customers the most, and what seems to be, not that there's no difficulty, but things just flow, right? So I don't have this too esoteric an answer, but I would say today I pay attention more to the flow of things than I did in the past. In the past, in my first few ventures, it was just me choosing an outcome and just bulldozing my way there. And yes, sometimes it worked, and sometimes it was just, most of the time it would work, but it would be painful. And maybe, I'm guessing there were opportunity costs. If I had been more focused on flow, maybe I could have put all the energy and the persistence into accelerating, going with the flow.
Discussion topic: the impact of Asian culture on startup founders.
Looking at your culture heritage, your culture background, or your history, basically, do you feel this kind of a culture heritage background give you benefits or advantage, or some disadvantages in starting your business, growing your business, doing your new venture activity?
I grew up in Singapore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in a, upper lower to middle class family. That was the context of my growing up. And I went through the Singapore school system. And we were essentially, brought up to do things right. We were brought up with a culture of prudence. In Singapore, you don't waste food, for example. Like if your food on the table, like for me and my friends, most of our parents would say, eat everything on the table, like don't waste food, right? So I would say that, growing up, my cultural context had elements of scarcity. The positive way to see it is we were prudent. The negative way to see it is we didn't really have the abundance mentality that I find seems to be more prevalent here in California, right? And so in application, I find that I bootstrap really well. I can get a lot done with very little resources in a very short span of time, right? And that's, I believe, a strength that I can bring to, any like running a business or starting a company. The flip side is, because of that kind of upbringing, I generally, if I'm not self-aware enough, I tend not to invest too much into the future, right? I have a preference for prudence and bootstrapping, and I tend to go for like lower cost solutions. And sometimes that will trip me up. Sometimes I need to bring in a really expensive expert, or I need to purchase something that's really expensive, or pay for something, with a high price tag, but it can be very, very useful, right? So I think the key is self-awareness, right? So that's one aspect of my growing up, right? I would say, and this is, I think this is commonly said, right? A lot of people in Asia say Americans are great at marketing, and actually that's one distinct difference in the culture. I think it's very observable. In a typical like room full of people, it's quite typical that people from a Western culture will be a lot more vocal, and that's why people say that they're really great at marketing, because they're willing to speak up and to express their views and to articulate their thoughts. Whereas I find that most, obviously not all, but many Asians would generally prefer to work silently, and so there's this balance of working on substance versus working on the narrative. And both substance and the narrative are equally important. But in many cases, in the building of companies at the early stage, it's really important for a company to have a strong narrative, right? No point if you've got lots and lots of substance, but it's only available to a few people. So I'd say, yeah, I think that's one key and probably a very common example that you've heard. So, apologies that you're hearing this probably for the 100th time. But I think the key thing is having that awareness, like having that self-awareness of culture is super important. For all the work that I've done on myself, after all of that, I've come to realize that, well, if I behave a certain way, if I have a certain strength or weakness, it's not because I'm Asian, right? It's just me. It's nothing to do with my cultural heritage. But at the same time, understanding the context or being mindful about the context in which I was brought up helps me to uncover some of the inner conversations that I have, right? So for example, I think I talked about this a while ago, right? As part of my personal reflection, as part of my personal journey, I got to one point where I realized, hey, why am I not willing to make investments into the future when I know that it can help me, right? Or why has my tendency been to bootstrap and to pick solutions that are sometimes subpar just because they're cheaper, and resulting in greater complexity, resulting in higher cost in the long term, right? So for instance, instead of hiring a grade A kind of accountant, hire a grade B accountant because it's cheaper, and then later realizing that, the junior accountant caused a whole bunch of problems that I will have to undo later on. So, after making a whole bunch of these mistakes and then realizing, it's because of the context of my childhood and the inner conversations that I have, that causes me to lean towards this kind of decision. So when I uncover this kind of thinking, this kind of inner conversations, just helps me to make better decisions.
Discussion topic: how to enter and grow your business in Southeast Asia.
You are very experienced, successful in Southeast Asia, building business there. So if for any kind of a new startup or companies or entrepreneur who want to penetrate or enter that particular market space, try to build the new business, grow the new business there, what's your advice? What's your kind of a reflection to share with entrepreneurs who have those kind of interests?
Southeast Asia region, it's very complex, right? When people talk about Southeast Asia, or when founders and investors talk about Southeast Asia, I think most of the time they're talking about either Indonesia, or like the Indo-China region as a cluster. My base has been in Singapore, and Singapore is a very, very unique market. Right? It's a very small population, like 5 to 6 million people. But obviously very successful in some areas. But the domestic market is not huge. So many people who are based in Singapore have a lot of exposure to the rest of the Southeast Asian markets. But the real activity, from what I hear, is really in Indonesia and the other parts outside Singapore. Right? So my advice is, if somebody's coming from the US and going to Southeast Asia, want to build something in Southeast Asia, I think immersion is important. I think getting started in Singapore is very useful because it serves as a bit of a hub. The reason why we incorporate, the reason why we do business predominantly in Singapore is because many Southeast Asian companies incorporate their business in Singapore because of the business laws, the tax regime over there, and this credibility, right? You really need to be very compliant when running a business in Singapore. So I would say shortcut would be go to Singapore, set up a business in Singapore, come talk to us. I would say spend time immersing, like just travel the Southeast Asia region and understand it's very, very different from the US. Just language and everything, right? So I think spending time immersing in the culture is important, and not jumping in there and starting a business. It's very different from a Californian entrepreneur going to Austin or going to Texas and starting a business there.
Discussion topic: how to become an effective global entrepreneur.
What's your advice? Because you've been doing this for so many times, like try to straddle your new venture between Singapore and California, US. I'm sure there are a lot of kind of hassles, kind of struggles or excitings, things. So what's your advice to people who want to follow similar path of building, growing new venture business?
I think there are a lot of benefits in building global businesses. And I think people already realize that benefit, right? People are hiring, people are building businesses here in California, but hiring developers in other markets, hiring customer service personnel in other markets. And people are just searching for talent all over the world, right? It's more important to find the right talent than basically, if you find the right talent, you don't really want to care where they're based.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think most startups that I know are already by default global. I guess, growing up in Singapore, and having the ambition to build, large companies, I had to be global from day one. I couldn't rely on a country or a domestic market of 6 million people.
Right.
So in terms of what would my advice be?
Like mistakes or lessons or challenges people need to know.
A few things. Well, so one thing is, I think just get your personal life and your family life in order, in alignment with that. And by that, I mean, I'm a minimalist, right? I have very little material possessions. I make sure I'm very intentional about, what I buy, what I keep and all. In fact, I actually have a list of all the things that I own, and they're like, I think I've got 109 items on those lists. Every single article of clothing, every single piece of equipment. I have very little material possessions. That means I can just get up and go anytime I want. My family is also kind of born global, right? my wife and I have been married for 14 years. In that 14 years, we've moved 14 times. We lived in 14 homes. And we're able to do that because A, we're minimalist. B, we homeschool our children. And so that means that if an opportunity presents itself here in the US, we can be here. And when there's a need to be back in Asia to work with the team in Asia, we can do that as a family, right? So, I have all my systems working for me to communicate across time zone, across culture. I use video, I use Slack, I have an internal blog to make sure that I am, wherever I am in the world, whatever time zone, I can be effective. So, just personal preparation, family preparation is important. The other thing that's important is, I guess, just having friends. We talked a lot about building business. In fact, we spent the first 1 whole hour about how to build a business, how founders can get started, what are some of the tips and tricks, or how do we find product market fit? And it's a big subject. But what's the use of all this ambition and all the work if you're not having fun in life, right? And I think life is only meaningful in relationships. And I found that the reason why if you ask me today, are you happy? I'm very happy. I'm very happy and content. Sometimes the work is really tough, but I'm very happy and content because I'm surrounded by really great people. I'm surrounded by a team that I enjoy working with. And I'm also surrounded by friends who know that I'm doing what I'm doing and who are just great friends to be with. So I'd say, if you want to build a company that is global, then make sure that your life and your friendships are global as well.
Discussion topic: advices for people who want to try startup ventures.
What's your advice to young entrepreneurs? Because these days there are so many people want to at least try this path. So what's your advice, especially to, let's say, young Asian kind of people who want to follow similar footsteps as yours?
Yeah, well, again, so much to say about this. Maybe I'll just share some stuff that may be less shared, and that is maybe ask yourself why not to do it, right? When you're young and when you're excited about ideas, you can find 101 reasons to do something. I think it can be very helpful at the start to ask yourself if you can think of 101 reasons why not to do something. And if after thinking through all those reasons why you shouldn't do it, you still want to do it, then you could do it, right? I like ideas. I have at any one point in time like 10, 20 different business ideas that I want to work on, right? But before I allow myself to work on something, I now ask myself, or I now force myself to think of all the reasons why it's a bad idea. I ask people, instead of asking people, is this a good idea? Would you buy it? Would you use this product? I say, tell me the reasons why you shouldn't, why you wouldn't. Right. So doing that filtering yourself at the start, I think is useful. The other thing would be, like I said earlier, it's a business. It's not you. Don't get caught up with the whole thing. The third thing is don't settle, right? And again, I guess I'm summarizing everything that I shared just now, and that is, don't settle for stuff that is not worth your time. Don't settle for people whom you think can do the job, but don't match, are not a good match for you in terms of the values. Yeah. What else? So many things I can say. Don't try to do everything yourself, right? And I'd say just surround yourself with people who can relate to you. And who can share their experiences, right? Like exactly what you're doing. You're the reason why you're doing this, instead of just simply, because we don't like content, we don't like examples and life stories of people who've built billion-dollar businesses, right? Why are you looking for breadth of founders who are building, who are still in their stages of building their business and the early stage of building new businesses? Because you want, people need to relate. People need to know that I'm not alone. And maybe that's the one thing that, maybe that's the one piece of advice I can offer, as well as to constantly remember that whatever you're going through, you're not the only one going through it, right? And you're not alone in that journey. And for me, that's been one of the most comforting moments in many of my experiences in the earlier years. When I go through really tough moments, it's not the advice, it's not how to get out of those tough moments that matter. Or it's not about somebody saying, yeah, you don't deserve to have to go through all this. I feel sorry for you. None of that mattered as much as knowing that somebody else had gone through it and survived. Somebody else was going through it, right? Or somebody made that mistake as well. I think that not being alone is recognizing and realizing and creating structures that help you constantly remember that you're not alone is probably one of the best things you can do for yourself. And so there are organizations, I'm part of several groups, and there are many people who organize groups of founders or entrepreneurs who come together to, just share in each other's journey, right? Support groups.
Discussion topic: my timeless lesson on pursuing startup ventures.
Do you have like a memorable moment that teaches you the lesson that still stays? The teachable lesson, memorable lessons could be the mistakes or some kind of aha moment, but really kind of stay with you for so many years. That if you do have those, kind of a real insight stories, big moment, would you please share with us?
Aha moments about mistakes.
Yeah, it could be a mistake, but something relating to the entrepreneurship, like starting, growing new business in that whole journey, whatever you still remember those things, or remind you those things still stay and remind you because of certain experience. If you do, I think we'd love to hear that if possible.
There's so many again. I'm going to share what I think is still the most important, right? I hope I don't sound like a broken record, but it's all about people. It's all about the 3 to 5 or the 3 to 10 people that you're working with on a daily basis, the people that work most closely with you. It's all about people. And it's all about not settling, right? And I've had, I don't want to name names, right, on this. I don't think it's fair. But I've had several moments when my logical mind told me that I need to have somebody like that person on the team, right? But in my gut, I would observe things like that person's, the way the person thinks and the way the person acts with other people as well. I've had 3 or 4 instances where I would find a really great person who's like, great credentials. And one common trait is that these people that I've met tend to be very self-absorbed. It's like all about themselves, right? They don't really care about the people that are supporting them in their work that they're working with. It's really all about themselves. And that was unsettling for me. My logical mind said, in terms of credentials, great person to have on the team. But my gut just didn't feel right with the lack of authenticity, and that self-absorption. But I went ahead and brought them on board the team anyway. And basically, it just turned out to be long, painful messes. So those moments, those experiences are etched in my memory. On the flip side, like I said, I've got a great leadership team. And actually, all my co-founders for all the ventures that I've been in still remain lifelong friends today. And it's a joy to work with them. So if I had to summarize everything, I would say, for me, building a company and enjoying the journey, it's all about people. It's all about the relationships. And so focus on that and don't settle.
Discussion topic: intuition and mindfulness in running startup ventures.
All my startups have been venture backed. I've had investors invest in all my startups. And we're talking about operating by pure logic and operating by intuition and how it's important to have both. For me, I don't know if this is common for everyone, but for me, I found that it was hard to validate decisions that are intuitive. Because how do you explain to somebody intuition? How do you explain to somebody, well, I hired this or I made this product decision because, I felt in my gut, right? It's a hard to rationalize and explain that. But from my personal experience, like intuition has been a huge lifesaver, has been a huge asset in decisions that I made, again, about people and about building the team. And I have one investor who has been, who's been very encouraging. And I asked him one day, I said, why do you invest in me? Why do you invest in the company? Right? He was one of our first few investors. And he was very encouraging. He said, a number of reasons why he invested in the company. And he also said, Melvin, you've got, great intuition. And I was very encouraged by that. It really lifted my spirits. But more importantly, it affirmed my decision to lean in on my intuition in some decision making, right? Not so much to depend on it entirely, right? Because I think we still need to operate with a logical framework, but it encouraged me a lot, and it caused me to, it allowed me to give myself a lot more permission to rely on my intuition in decision making.
Actually, that's a very good point. Again, these are probably side talk. Maybe just like the people say, generate AI model, they can spit out some results. Even these people who develop the model, they cannot explain.
Yeah.
Maybe it's kind of the same thing. There are a lot of things we don't know why it happened, but it turns out, maybe general AI can help us. But I do have follow-up question.
I would just add on to one thing, right? So we emphasize a lot on skills. We emphasize on a lot of technology. We emphasize a lot on logical thinking and engineering in building a company. There is another dimension to company building that is hardly talked about that we probably, we didn't even cover it. But there is another dimension to life and business. And there are many ways to express what this dimension is. We talked a little bit about flow just now, but there is a spiritual dimension to our existence, and there is a spiritual dimension to running a business as well. I hardly use LinkedIn, but I think about a couple of months ago, I just sort of posted a little note on LinkedIn. With the thesis or the notion that I think companies in future will have a role called a chief spiritual officer, right? And again, I use the word spiritual. I use that, the term a spiritual dimension, but, we all interpret it differently. Some businesses commonly, use the phrase mindfulness, and they talk about mindful practices as individuals and as well as teams. So you could call it about being mindful. You could call it about being, adopting a spiritual approach to things. But there's this whole dimension of mindful living and spiritual thinking that I think is yet to be fully uncovered in running a business.
You constantly mention about the importance of using your intuition, using your gut feeling to help you to make judgment. I'm asking, maybe impossible to answer a question. Is there any kind of a shortcut? Is there any kind of advice for young people to better develop their gut feeling? Just to accelerate it a little bit, or it's impossible. The only possible is experience. You have to go through the whole thing. That's my question.
I think it's both. I think.
Then what do you do?
I think there's a way to shortcut. There are many mindful practices. There are many ways to shortcut this. Mindful journaling. Every morning when I wake up, most mornings at least, I spend 20 to 40 minutes journaling. That's one, right? Taking walks. Sometimes it's harder these days. The busier we get, it's harder to take walks. But walks alone in nature, journaling, are ways to cultivate that. Talking to friends, talking to like-minded friends who also believe that there is this dimension to life. Talking to friends who are willing to sit down and not rush through things and take deep breaths with you and thinking deeply about things, and just being open to the notion that not everything operates in a logical framework. being open to the fact that there are some things that happen to us that are meaningful and that can be very profound and leave an impact, but that we have no way of engineering on our own. I think that's one. So in a way, there's no way to force it. It's not like you can just download everything immediately or read a book and follow a checklist of 10 steps. But at the same time, there are also practices that can accelerate. And the more you practice, the faster you get to that point, I believe.